Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to bring you the state of Spirit Shell as our mythic testing has been completed. We've been able to see all the fights so far, so I wanted to start breaking down some of my observations, some of the things that I'm looking at as we are looking towards 9.1. It looks to be coming out hopefully sooner than we think, and we'll be able to dive into Chains of Domination in no time. In some of my previous videos, I was talking about quite a bit of the doubt in whether or not you'd be running with Spirit Shell or where you'd be running with Evangelism, and we were primarily focusing on playing with Venthyr, right? Having Dora Shadows, of course, has been great. We're so used to being able to have that low 45-second CD of Mind Games on hand to be able to build up our shields, but minute and a half cooldown getting added onto Spirit Shell, no bueno. Also, of course, the Spirit Shell nerf that we received in 9.05, reducing the atonement to shield transfer rate, also not too great as well. But what it's kind of resulted in is you run Mindbender, and you're saving it that extra 30 seconds every single time for the Spirit Shell, and that costs you a ton of mana in a spec that's already really starved. You're also going to be building up just weaker shields in general that are often not getting fully capped out, so that also is going to be quite a problem as well, especially since we're getting scaled up to like 239 for like full heroic gear as we do a lot of these mythic boss tests. The flexibility of having that low cooldown is really nice when you start looking at some of the encounters like Guardian of the First Ones, which has about a minute and a half timers. So you're able to have like a Mind Games burst with some steady damage going on, but then you're going to be able to have Mind Games for every single one of his bursts that happens as he's pulsing the raid. Something like Remnant of Ner'zhul has damage almost every 40 seconds and a lot of steady damage. So those are some fights where you could take advantage of Spirit Shell's 1.5 minute cooldown and then using an extra Mind Games in between to take advantage. But then there's also the very large downside that when you start getting to encounters like Kel'Thuzad, the penultimate boss fight, or you get into Soulrender Dormazine, most of the damage is focused in a very specific burst window. It's going to be around every 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes or so, where you just get tons of damage out onto the raid, and having as much effective health as possible is extremely relevant. So that's another thing where, yeah, having those weaker shields or more consistent can have some upside sometimes, but in other areas it can be more of a liability as a result. If you did want to play Evangelism on some of these encounters, what you'll end up finding is that Evangelism and Mind Games together is kind of like Light's Wrath Reborn. Except, while Light's Wrath felt great on a lot of fights with predictable damage in Legion like Agrimar, it also felt terrible when you were doing encounters like Kingaroth, which would have variable damage, where the orbs would spawn at a specific point, but they may not explode until, 10 or 20 seconds later, just because of how the encounter worked, because it would rely on the DPS or tanks or whoever of your group to actually cause the damage to hit, right? So when it comes to something like Kel'Thuzad, you have to kill all those spikes with the raid to be able to actually activate the raid damage. Soulrender Dormazine, people have to actually physically grab the chains and walk them out of the raid before the explosion actually ends up happening there. So when you're trying to play with something like Evangelism and Venthyr at the same time, you have a very narrow window of that extra 5 or 6 seconds that Evangelism will net you, but if you miss it, then you're just in really bad shape, right? On the other hand, Kyrian has been seeing a ton of buzz lately, as it does have a long cooldown, which can also get reduced by the Mykonos soulbind for the Kyrian. It's going to give you the Effusive Anima Accelerator, which is the capstone trait that takes about 3 or 4 weeks after the raid comes out to actually unlock. It's like around 53 or 54 to get this ability, but it does give you 12 seconds of cooldown reduction per target hit. If you hit 5 targets, you get 60 seconds, and that is the maximum that Mykonos will give you. There's a couple different fights where you can get some good cooldown reduction out of it. Most notably, Soulrender and Kel'Thuzad are very important fights to get it on. And then you can more closely align that 3-minute cooldown with the 1.5-minute Spirit Shell CD. The problem is, there's a couple different scenarios where you'll be kind of like penalized almost on something like Guardian of the First Ones, because you'll have one fantastic, extremely large Spirit Shell ramp out of Boon of the Ascended, and then your second Spirit Shell comes up and you can get Rabid Shadows and Exaltation and Courageous Ascension all 3 together quickly, no problem. But that second Spirit Shell ramp will only have Shadow Fiend on hand. So you could go with something like Venthyr, where you're going to get like 2 really small spirit shell shields, or you're gonna get constant small shields every single time, or you could have Kyrian and have 1 huge one and 1 weak one, but the difference should be more in Kyrian's favor, just from what a lot of the people have been looking at, what Reglitch and what a lot of the guys in Focus Will have been looking at, and a lot of the theory craft has been looking at, is that the Kyrian shields, if they're continuously being consumed, which obviously these fights will be consuming, should be able to net you much larger shields in general. So if you're ride or die on Spirit Shell, then that should be the play. But what if you wanted to start playing with Evangelism? Well, like I mentioned before, Evangelism was like feast or famine when you're playing with Venthyr. But if you were going to play it with Boon of the Ascended, it actually would be really nice because all of Boon's damage isn't focused into 1 global. So there's actually a 5, 6, 7 second window or so of you just constantly putting out additional healing onto the raid, which would work really well on something like Kel'Thuzad, which has very heavy dots that go out onto the raid after you pop the spikes. Alternatively, they happen rarely enough that you could very frequently align Boon of the Ascended and Spirit Shell together so that you could just shield all that damage instead. So it's something to consider that Kyrian, while it does have some flexibility issues when it comes to timing the ability, when it looks to capture the healing of it, it actually is more spread out than Venthyr is, so Evangelism can actually be pretty good there. And it also continuously builds up the shields in more than 1 global, which is also going to be nice to be able to continuously capture multiple burst events, like popping multiple spikes on Kel'Thuzad, like capturing more Purging Protocol damage on Guardian of the First One, so you have additional effective health to be able to survive the next hit, right? Same thing with breaking chains on Soul Render Dormazine, or everybody's running all over the room on Remnant of Ner'zhul, getting bounced left, right, and center, and your healers are less stressed to be healing while they're getting bounced all over the place, because you're going to be having those shields on hand to be able to help everybody out. There's also the Sphere's Harmony Legendary, which can give you some additional cooldown reduction. It would be, of course, at the expense of the Clarity of Mind Legendary. You wouldn't be able to run both of them. But Sphere's Harmony can give you an additional cooldown, or additional 1 minute of cooldown reduction whenever you pop your Boon of the Ascended. So there's multiple ways that you can be able to align Boon of the Ascended properly with Spirit Shell CD. That said, I definitely will miss having Dora Shadows on hand. I'm gonna switch to Goblin because this raid tier is gonna be super important for Goblin. I'm already stocking up on Soul Ash to be able to get a lot of those things ready. And while there are a number of challenges with like getting Mykonos' cooldown reduction or having a couple less atonements applied because you don't have Clarity of Mind, if we're looking at another tier, which it seems like we're heading in the direction of, but again, it's PTR, right? If we're going into that direction where there is going to be lots and lots of heavy burst damage, that needs to be a priority for us, and we need to be able to make the Spirit Shells as large as possible, then, yeah, Kyrian's going to be looking to be that savior for us to be able to continue having that large value. Like I mentioned before, having the negative side effect, having the weaker Spirit Shell shields on something that has like a 1.5 minute fight timers, can be mitigated somewhat by Barrier, because Barrier's value definitely increases while AMZ has been just nerfed to become a noodle, right? Whether or not we run Blood DKs, we'll see. Those are actually super legit anti-magic zones, but if we just have, you know, standard and holy DK AMZs, they're very, very weak. Even at like a 2-minute cooldown, it doesn't net you a crazy raid cooldown like it used to be, so you'll get even greater value out of Barrier as a result. There's still going to be a place for Discipline in the raid, 100%. The plan I have at the moment is to switch to Goblin, have like 10k Soul Ash stocked up in case I need to make multiple legendaries. If I need to make multiple Clarity of Minds or multiple Sphere's Harmony, I don't think I need to do that with Sphere's Harmony, but I'll tell you that in a sec. Because there's these domination sockets that are out there in the raid, which might just be its own video that we make later on if you guys want. Let me know in the comments down below. But basically, there's like 5 armor pieces that are going to have these domination sockets that are going to have some pretty powerful effects. They've got leech, they've got stat bonuses, they've got just extra damage, and if you put the right ones together, you can also get a set bonus that works in the raid, which looks to be pretty important so far, and it's going to be just very, very important to have the flexibility with your legendaries. So if you get a domination socket on the chest piece, which is where your Clarity of Mind is, you may want to just have a ring on hand to be able to make your Clarity of Mind so that you can keep Clarity of Mind legendary on while you're wearing your domination socket. Something to consider, as they've been adding extra additional slots for everybody to be able to make a second or third copy of whichever legendary that they have, so that they can kind of navigate some of the challenges that these domination sockets are really throwing at us, which is very annoying. I am almost done leveling Kyrian, and I would recommend doing it now rather than later. And I think my plan so far is to start with Venthyr to sort of confirm that it's not going to be as strong as Kyrian. That way I'll kind of have like a bit of a hedge to be able to compare against. I could also finish up Kyrian and then just hold on to my Venthyr quest so I could maybe jump back. But I think the biggest thing, especially as we get into the later fights of the tier, I think that Kyrian is going to be really showing its value by the end, especially on something like Kel'Thuzad. So I want to be able to have that option to be able to jump back to Kyrian as we get to fights like that and Soul Render, which I know are going to be absolutely key to have Kyrian's giant Spirit Shell Boon of the Ascended heals on hand. Then a lot of theorycraft that's been going around as well. If you haven't checked out the Focus Wheel Discord, there's been a ton of discourse on that. I would highly recommend it, as they've been talking a lot about how you would adjust your cast sequences, how you would, play around whether or not you want to have your Ascended Eruption hit the enemy, if you can hit one singular enemy and increase your Spirit Shell shields, or whether you're stuck out at range and you can't, and how you start adjusting for that. And a lot of the theorycraft on why the throughput's going to be stronger and what to watch for there. Otherwise, let me know if you guys have any other questions. I know there's been a lot of like bull or bear thesis, or like the strengths and weaknesses of some of the different covenants, and they're definitely going to be making it a lot harder for Disc Priest next patch. But I do 100% think that there is going to be a home for Disc in every raid group that there is. I do think that it's going to be harder for people, but when done successfully, and when you have thousands and thousands of people working to figure it out once we hit live, I'm sure it's going to become a lot more clear and a lot more straightforward as well. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. And like I said, be sure to leave me any questions down in the comments below, and be sure to sub to the channel as well for more videos. All right. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'll catch y'all next time.